Am I dying? I think I'm dying. I don't want to die.
All I can say is help me, God, help me, God.
The gun violence crisis now led to more tragedy
More
this
violence
afternoon.
in the city of Philadelphia
Police there
tonight.
investigating a shooting that left
Multiple
3 young
shootings,
people
including
dead.
a teenager.
What are your thoughts about will I come home tonight? Do you ever think about that?
You don't know what it is to be a young black man in Philadelphia unless you walk in those shoes.
I don't sit in parked cars. Too many guys get sprayed up like in the car.
I can't count how many times I've seen a black man take his last breath.
Before the trigger's pulled, 1,001 thoughts go through their head. Say no, no, no. Yes, do it. No, no.
Selling drugs, that's synonymous with guns.
2 teens are dead after they were shot on North 56th Street.
An 18-year-old man is shot tonight. The epidemic of gun violence that police are trying to get
Gun violence is not the issue. It's a symptom of many, many issues.
That look in his face said trauma, undealt with trauma.
If we're taught that to be men, we gotta be violent, and we're taught that violence is normal, and then we live in a country that has all these guns, then we're creating a recipe for a violence epidemic, a gun violence epidemic.
The city is on pace to surpass last year's homicide.
I'm a black man in a crazy society, right? Not only did y'all shoot me, but now I gotta survive the rest of my life.
This pain don't never, ever go away until you dead. And we need help. We need help. We need to be talking to somebody.
For many years, I was part of the problem in my community.
You know, you lose that hope, and then when you find it with a vengeance.
Today, I'm blessed to be part of the solution.
So the best way to deal with hate is to deal with it in love and turn it around.
A lot of them don't know that word till someone comes to them and say, look, I believe in you. I want to see you succeed, and I love you enough to want to see you 20 years from now.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Vanessa Taylor, and I'm the impact producer at First Person Arts. So first, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. And I also want to thank the PHRC, Ohio River Valley, for hosting this screening of our documentary Trigger. We're really grateful for the opportunity to be here and connect with you all today. It's really exciting to be doing a virtual format again. So a little bit about First Person Arts. We're a Philly-based not-for-profit. And we believe everyone has a story to tell, and no one person's story is more important than one another's. And so 8 years ago, we joined the City of Philadelphia's Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services on their initiative Engaging Males of Color, or EMOC. And so EMOC addresses the wellness of men of color who suffer disproportionately from wellness issues, due in part to stigma around discussing trauma and seeking help. So we're really grateful to the entire EMOC team, and especially Gabe Bryant, for their continued work around this project. And so Trigger is more than just a screening. It's also a gun violence intervention. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to have a talk back with a cast member from the film. And so this isn't just you being talked at. Throughout the conversation, you are encouraged to leave comments and questions within the live, and we'll try to address them as best as we can. But thank you again.
Good afternoon once again, and thank you all for joining us for a wonderful screening of our film Trigger. And thank you, Vanessa, and the entire First Person Arts team, and certainly our colleagues over at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. I want to bring Chuck Horton in. Chuck, who is not only a filmmaker and storyteller in the film, but he's somebody who was a friend and somebody who we definitely value very much for his insight and the work that he does with regards to the trauma of gun violence in our city. Chuck, I want to first of all say, how are you doing? And then also, as you think about these films, as we continue to screen it, what goes through your mind as you know your story continues to be told over and over and over again?
So I'm good. And how do I feel about when these stories
my story is told in these films and people see it, I think it's like it's hard to be so transparent and open, but I think that in the process of being open, people learn, and see things in a different perspective. That sometimes in communities you hear about gun violence, you hear about people getting hurt, you hear about people dying, but you don't actually know a person. You don't actually hear the aftermath of how gun violence has affected someone. So to be open and to be transparent, if it helps someone, it's worth it. You have to take the good and the bad in life, and sometimes you have to take that bad stuff and you have to transition into some good stuff, and hopefully it can help someone, and take someone that's in the midst of all of the violence and doing certain things in this community to see something in a different way, to be like, wait a minute, I didn't really understand how my actions is devastating individuals. And maybe if they see it as an individual and their actions is in a negative way, they can stop what they're doing and change the direction of their life and be a positive for someone.
You open the film with a very powerful introduction about the time when you were shot and injured, which ultimately would change your life at the age of 17. Bring us through that journey, if you will, of being years old and 17-year-old Chuck, right? And what you were doing and what happened that led up to that shooting and how that affects you even now to this day, so many years later.
So I was 17 years old, got in a fight. That's what happens in the city of Philadelphia as a young person. And you're talking about over 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, guns wasn't as a tool that you use in fighting, it was just like, it was all hands. And when that situation happened, it was like a shell shock on everybody in the community that knew me. First of all, it was just like, this happened to Chuck. Like, oh my God, this is not supposed to happen to him, And when it happened to me, it just like the direction of where I wanted to go in life seemed like it was not attainable. It was like I'm never going to be anything. It's when you have a plan for your life and you see that it's all these big things, and then something happened and you feel like I'm nothing. That's devastating to a person that sees themselves in a bigger way. It's not at the level of conceit, but you should always look at yourself as like, I'm all that. You should really feel that way about yourself. And at 17, you have all that swagger, you have all that like gusto, everything, and it just turns to, I don't know who I am now. I'm lost. And it's like this. I always say with me, it's three people inside of me. There's Chuck, Chucky, and Charles. Chucky is that 17-year-old kid that is still hurting, is wounded, and don't know who he is. But Chuck is like that protector, and that protects Chuck and Charles, and is that aggression, is that figuring it out real quick, that person is just the strength. And Charles is kind of like that softer business side, working out. But I don't, if I didn't figure out a way to define myself in multiple ways, I'd have forever been lost and not knowing how to come out of this thing.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I think that journey is important for those of us who are watching and who may be also new to that experience. By the way, speaking of that, if you do have a question, we are going to bring those up. So continue to put those questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to those questions. And I'll get to those in 1 second. I actually have one more question for you, and then we'll get to some more questions from the chat, Chuck. We also know that you've done some great work with folks in the community who also are in wheelchairs to sort of get them through, right? Talk a bit about that work that is so vital to our community to be able to provide a sense of hope and healing to those folks who also find themselves in a wheelchair.
Okay, so the group is called a Will Family. And a Will family is individuals who are living at post-gun violence, and some of the people who might besides gunshot might be in different types of accidents that's left them paralyzed, spinal cord injuries, and there's some people who also are still walking, but are gunshot survivors. So what we do, we take people from injury to independence, and that is the game plan. So once you're injured, a lot of times I get calls from hospitals, rehabs, there's people in the street, family members. I get referred to from a lot of things. I work for SEPTA right now, but prior to SEPTA, I used to work for the Mayor's Office on Disabilities. I was the former executive director, assessment compliance specialist, and the AJ coordinator for the Mayor's Office on Disabilities in the entire city of Philadelphia. So in that work, it was just kind of helping people navigate their lives with disabilities. So when it's like I've been at here for 35 years. I predate the ADA. So when you have individuals who are living from a gunshot and their lives is totally changed, it's just like, what do I do? You can't go back to your same house sometimes because you have steps. We're a home city. You don't know where you're going to go. Some people are still caught up in the violence that caused them to be injured. So it's like, what do I do now? So I get contacted by a lot of organizations and a lot of people and just saying, can you help individuals? And I mean, I tell you, we've had guys in 1 year go from driving, in school, living on their own, and just figuring out a game plan to life because you're around other individuals who are living the same thing. And it's like they take a blueprint. I kind of give everybody a blueprint of my life. And all of my mentees who I've had over the years, they look and they see like I can do it. And I'm gonna tell you the one thing that is one of the common things that most of the guys who have had records, who have been in the streets, who have been incarcerated, they couldn't believe that they're in college, that they're like I didn't think I could do this. And one of the guys, I'm serious, he's in college. He's on the dean's list. He had to write a 5-page paper. He wrote a 10-page paper, didn't even realize it. He's proud of himself. And he said when he was sitting in themselves, they will always talk about the lame guys, lamers. They so lame, talking about the guys in the street that go to work every day, doing the right thing, being positive. And they was always calling them lame. But he said, when I got into jail, he said, I realized we was the lame guys. We was the ones that we wish we was lame. And so nowadays he's like, I'm happy to be lame because I'm out here doing this thing and my life is so much better than it was before, you know? And he was living with his mom, and I had to really open his eyes to something. He's like, your mom has been taking care of you, and she's been like living her life through you. Now that you're living on your own, you're doing all yourself, she has her life back. And he didn't realize that until it was just like the light went on. He's like, yo, she does. And he was crying. He was just like, I just, for him to see it. And his mom is so much more proud of him now because he's on the path that he was never on before. And he has that fire in him. And he's just like, he's doing great things. He's doing awesome. He's doing awesome. But that's like everybody in the group, after we get them, they surround themselves around one another. And it's just like they find a place of peace where I can say what I want to say and not be judged, but also have a brother and a sister that can support me in my pain and help me heal and be able to go out in this world and fight another day.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the work that you're doing with those folks who definitely need it as they start their own journey or continue their own journey. We want to bring up our question from the chat, coming from the Healthy Village Learning Institute. Thank you all for watching us this evening. Says, I'm interested in hearing some strength-based actions that generated successes that changed individuals, families, and community norms. Any strength-based actions that you've seen that work, Chuck, during this process?
Well, when you're working with individuals, the one thing I think is the most is to be real. Like, when you're dealing with these guys in the street, or you're dealing with somebody who is traumatized, and you're dealing with all these things, faking, they recognize a fake. And when you recognize a fake, you're not trying to be around it. You don't. How can you lead me to something that you don't know anything that you're talking about? And when, like, we have some of the guys are so aggressive, and they come from the streets, and when they're just, I tell you, just dealing with the hospitals, or they're dealing with different organizations, they don't know. They don't understand the aggression, and they think the aggression is like, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm just trying to hurt you, I'm just trying to be negative. And it's not. This is the way that they conduct themselves. And it's the way they've only conducted themselves because they're from the street, or they've been in prison so long that it's like, it's a survival, you know? So when you actually deal with people, you gotta be real. And so that's one of the actions that you can't fake it. And if you don't know, say you don't know. Be real with individuals that you support, and don't try to just. And the one thing I say to start off with is let them know, like, I've never lived in your world. Just say, I've never lived in your world, but teach me, show me, educate me to you, your world, and everything that you lived. And I think that will give programs a better place of supporting individuals, and individuals will be more favorable to kind of listening, supporting you, and understanding that you have their best interests in mind.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, I will also say a few things as well based on the work we've done with EMOC and over at DBHIDS. I'll say one, to embrace the discomfort that comes with these stories, right? And that might be being vulnerable to share your own story of trauma and sharing your own personal story. And don't, feel, again, uncomfortable that perhaps your story of trauma perhaps isn't to the level of somebody that also has experienced it. The reality is that your shared trauma and you're just being vulnerable in that moment sends a message, right? And so you want to do that. That's worked for our team members. Also being able to be an avid and start an active listener, right? And so as you're hearing folks share this story, begin to throw those tidbits back at them, right? So what I'm hearing is, this happened, and so they know that you're actually listening to them. You're not on your phone. You're not actively doing something else. You're actually engaged in their conversation. And then also, every person has their own specific needs. Some folks will want to be more comfortable in a group setting, right? And so they're more comfortable around other guys, other people in general, other youth. Some may prefer a one-to-one. And so being able to figure that out early on so that you can best provide those services is always good. We always take the both and approach, not an either or. And so whatever works for each person is case by case, do those assessments to make sure that it's all, well and good. And then lastly, I would say, and it's one of the things that I do specifically with my young men, we always, give the old adage that, come as you are, right? Come as you are, come as you are. And so that means, however they are showing up in the space, if we find, by the way, speaking of the space, identifying a space that they trust, right? Identifying a place that they trust, not that we trust, but that they trust, right? So if it's your office, great. But if it's not, then awesome too. Finding that coffee shop, finding that rec center, finding that church or masjid or house of faith or community-based space. But to me, in my messaging, come as you are is only half the work, right? My position always is come as you are, but you're not going to stay as you are. And that's a very, very, very important part of the conversation, because what it's saying is that it's going to take some work on both of our ends to improve whatever situation got yourself into this role in the first place, right? So yeah, come as you are, but you're not going to stay as you are. And the reality is that in some time, whether you're with us for 3 months, for 6 months, a year's time, 5 years time, the reality is we're going to work specifically with your input and your insight and your personal sort of revelations on what needs to do to bring you from A to Z and bring you there in a different place so that you come out of this as a newer, better, and improved person.
And recognize one thing too, and also recognize silence silent conversation.
Yes, of course.
Because you have individuals that might be in a group and they're not adding anything.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to watch their body language. You have to watch those eyes or what the tweaking of what piques them to engage a little bit more, to be a little bit more receptive. Because sometimes the ones that are quietest is sometimes they might always be quiet and they might never say anything but their conversation is their body language. And so you have to recognize those individuals who body language is their conversation and try to lead the path of conversations towards where they can kind of get something from what's being spoken, what's being shared within the group. Because they might not never add, or it might take some months to add or open up a shell, but you just have to recognize those silent conversations that individuals have.
As we get to the next question, I'll close by saying this: when possible and when available, use spontaneity. And what I mean by that is, if you have like a group that meets every Thursday or whatever it is, maybe one day, maybe one Thursday out of that month, as soon as everybody arrives, you know what, everybody get up. We're going down to the center and just be out in the woods for like a day, just to spend, and we're gonna do a hike. And they had no idea they were going to do a hike, but just use that spontaneity, because for some of our folks, they may not be ready and willing to do that. If they were told that in advance, they might not show up. But once they get there, like, oh, okay, and you might hear the groans, and you might hear see the rolling of the eyes. But once they get on that bus or that van and get out into the woods and get some nature, you see just the eyes start opening to these new experiences that oftentimes they're not exposed to. If they're not exposed to it, then they won't be like, wow, this is actually a new world out there for me, right? This is something that I can actually access, and it's not foreign to me, and I can actually utilize it and use it towards my wellness. So use spontaneity just to kind of free up those sessions from being sometimes, as we understand, sometimes lethargic, sometimes repetitive, sometimes run of the mill. I think we have another question ready, so feel free to share the question. Thank you, Cheryl, for the question. How do cultural attitudes towards firearms influence rates of gun violence? It's a great question. Do you want to hit that, Chuck, or you want me to start?
Well, you start that.
You can also put the question back up just so we can make sure that we do cover this, right? And so I think that, what's key about this question is that for some folks that we engage, we find ourselves speaking with tons of folks where keeping a gun, frankly, is not even because they want to harm anybody, but it's for protection, right? It's really because they want to protect themselves, they want to protect their families, and they frankly want to protect their homes, right? So it's a safety issue, right? More than anything else. I hear that from everybody from, clergy, to young people, to the 30-year-old, parent and mom and dad with a child. It's all throughout, particularly for people of color. And so I think that there's a way in which to kind of discuss these attitudes around guns in a way that could be healthy, more so about safety, right? So we're having conversations about the gun locks, about having things locked up and making sure that you're not leaving things around, and where children can get to it or people who have other issues can get to it. I think there's also an attitude in the culture around being averse to guns, right? Because we've been inundated, with the violence so much that for many of us, even holding a firearm, even legally, something that we're just not about holding guns, right? Guns in of itself are something that we just kind of run away from. And so that can be challenging. And so I think how both of those affect the rates of gun violence is there are some of us who have easy access to guns, right? On the one hand, right? There are folks of us who have easy access to guns. They know that guns are in the home, so on those half days from work, from school rather, where you come home, but parent and caretakers are still at work. You can go to the closet because you know where mom or dad or grandmom or granddad keeps the gun in the house. You can take a look at it. You can, see through it. And so there is a process sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, of being desensitized to the gun culture, right? And it's obviously exacerbated by, video games and the normalization of violence that we see every day, particularly on social media, which probably is the worst of ways and impact, as we saw in the film, from T from No Gun Zone and from Anton Moore. And so I'll close by saying this as I pass it over to Chuck, really, it starts with having those deliberate conversations, right? And starting those conversations young, right? Don't wait until they're in high school, 15, 16 years old, to begin talking about guns in the home or guns in general. Start when they're on the K to 8 side, right? And obviously you can determine at what age works for you because you all know the children best or the young person best. But I would say start on the K to 8 side, what works for you. Talk about those attitudes towards guns and firearms and explain your own position to them, but also have them explain to you, what they think, and kind of have a line and kind of stick to it, and be open to, some of their questions that they might have about their own safety and their own traumas that might come from either routine gun violence in the neighborhood or even having heard or seen gun violence in their own community as well. Pass it over to you, Chuck.
So what I'm gonna say, one of the things that, and this is, let me touch a couple things. Well, there's been a couple guys in the group who are paralyzed because of people playing with guns. They're friends. We just lost one of the guys from the group. He was vent dependent for a number of years. He just passed. One of his best friends shot him and put him in the chair. And now his friend is dealing with the loss because his death is directly related to that bullet. Because of him being on the vent, it shortened his life and he passed. Great guy. I have another guy that I grew up with. His cousin shot him, paralyzed him, put him in a chair. The reason, and so the guys, and a lot of people, when we talk about it in our group, people are shocked that majority of the members in our group don't have a negative thought about guns. We don't. We realize something, that it's not the gun, it's individuals and it's violence. See, you have to talk about violence before you start talking about guns. Because a lot of people, before they pick up a gun, they've been violent in a lot of other ways. That violence has escalated to picking up a gun. And then what happens is it escalated because there's shooters in my group who have been shooters, who have shot people. Yes. And they've talked about it, that the first time that they shot a gun at someone, they wasn't shooting at an individual. They were shooting in the direction, but they wasn't trying to hit anybody. It just escalated to aiming more and more at the individual as time went on. And the reason why, and they said they were intrigued by guns because nobody talked to them about guns. And when they found the gun, it became like it's like a magical thing. That when they got in their hands, it was like, this is power. But if you teach gun safety, if you let kids know that there's a gun in the house, and then even it's like, there's been studies that's like people who like shoot and hunt and have their kids around it, they understand how dangerous it is. Yeah. It's not a toy. It's not a toy. So when they looking at movies and they're looking at, okay, I can hit every target every time I try. This is nothing about this. This is easy. It's on a video game. But then when you actually pick up the thing, you're like, it's heavy. It doesn't feel what I think is. And then if you take a kid, and this young people that shoot, they take their kids shooting and they shoot the gun, and it's like, this is scary. It scares me. I don't want any part of this. But when you give kids that opportunity, and especially young males, that testosterone thing, and I'm gonna one up you, that I'm not afraid of that gun. When they've never touched it before and they know nothing about it, what happens is that they have kind of like created almost like an understanding in a community around that gun, that I have to fit in, or this is what we do, this is how it works. Instead of saying like, I'm not messing with that gun, I shot a gun before and I don't like it, y'all cool with it, I'm not, and I'm gone. But you have to really, really, I think, just you have to talk to kids about guns. You can't, and you have to listen, but you have to listen too. And if you have guns in the house, do I say talk to them about, let them know it's a gun in the house, show them there's a gun in the house, let them know it's safety, and let them know all of the ins and out about it. Because my godson mother's a cop, and a lot of things they would teach him is like, leave the gun out and see, talk to the kid about the gun because they know you're a cop and there's a gun in the house. And it's like, well, she left it out just to see what he was going to do. It was unloaded, but she just left it on the table. And he got scared. He said, Mom, you left your gun on the table. Because she wanted to see what would he do. Because he's very adventurous. He's very, like, inquisitive. But he was afraid of it. And he understood, don't touch this thing. It's a dangerous thing.
Right.
And but you have to make sure these kids understand that.
Yeah, and I think I'll close before I go over to Leanne's question. One thing is also that we observe working with, our EMOC, initiative, which is engaging males of color once again, is particularly for, young men and boys of color, particularly Black and brown young men and boys, they need to know that, violence is not something that is unique to them, but in fact, it is uniquely, as you said, American. It's an American phenomenon, the rates of gun violence that are in this country. It's an American issue, where the number of folks who are incarcerated, every year. It's an American issue, the rates of poverty against the backdrop of, the extreme wealth in this country, right? It's a uniquely American problem of the violence, at all, let alone not being able to, sort of scrutinize Black and brown folks. Because if we're not careful, it'll turn into that. And we want to make sure that for a community that is already so marginalized, already so invisibilized, already so dealing with the detriments, dealing with, structural racism, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, all the things, that they not come away from these spaces feeling even less confident and even less self-esteem. Let's get to Leanne's question. What programs are available when young children are affected by the death of family members? Great question, Leanne. I'm not sure which city you are in, because we are showing this right now to our friends and colleagues in Beaver County, but we'll make sure to put some links in the chat that could hopefully be available to you. I know here in Philadelphia, we have tons of programs that do support young people, particularly those who are dealing with the loss of somebody in their family. There are programs that do support young people and children. I'm thinking about programs like NOMO, which is New Opportunities, New Options, More Opportunities here in Philadelphia, or short for NOMO. There also is a program called Frontline Dads that supports young people as well, and particularly those who are dealing with the death of family members. I could think about also the Father's Day Rally Committee, FDRC, that just actually created a new program for young people who were actually found themselves incarcerated, called Fathers on a Mission, or FOAM. And so they're doing some great work as well. But there's also, I'm sure, some local programs in your area if you're in the Beaver area. So feel free to check in with those spaces as you look for the links in the chat. But then also reach out as well to those departments. I know that we have a peer department of health that you can also access as well to ask some of these same questions. All right. Well, once again, folks, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to thank Chuck Horton. I want to thank you, Chuck, for always being ready and available to share your story and to be vulnerable to share your story, because we know that it's not easy to do so time and time again. And we want to thank you. We want to thank colleagues in Beaver County. We want to thank the Pennsylvania Human Resources Commission. We want to thank First Person Arts, and certainly on behalf of the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, or DBHIDS, we thank you for joining us this evening. Hopefully this film trigger for you provided you some hope, help, and healing. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening and stay safe.